Starting in a helicopter. This can't end well. Yup. Oh, how I miss Raven. Heretic, Soldier of Fortune, Wolfenstein, the 2009 one. However, no game will live in my head quite like Singularity. Not only for its intriguing premise and satisfying gunplay, but because it would be the last we'd ever see of them. I mean, they still exist, but can you really call being forced to be a support team for Call of Duty existing? It's a shame because Raven has always been a solid studio. Not everything they made was a hit, but nothing they made was bad either. The worst games they made were average, making them a pretty reliable dev team. They're honestly the main reason I want the Microsoft Activision purchase to go through. No fanboy bullshit, I don't care where Call of Duty ends up. Keep it multi-platform. I'm only interested in seeing the dev teams Activision owns working on their own projects again. Hashtag Free Raven. Singularity takes place in an alternate history universe where in 1950, the Soviet Union discovered an immensely powerful element called E99 hidden within an island. They were originally searching for uranium, but after discovering this E99, all attention turned to it. They quickly built research labs on this island, headed by Dr. Viktor Borisov, to figure out the full potential of this new element. This quick development of the island would include homes and schooling for the families of the scientists working there on what would now be named Katorga 12. In 1953, Nikita Khrushchev would take power of the Soviet Union and would pressure Dr. Borisov to begin field testing. Unfortunately, while powerful, E99 is also volatile. Disaster would strike, and there would be no known survivors. The Soviet Union covers this up, effectively wiping it off the map. Now in 2010, a US satellite flies over the island, detecting a massive radiation spike. They send in a team to investigate, and you're a part of that team, playing as Nathaniel Renko. Now this is a very interesting setup that is completely voided in about 10 minutes of being on the island. After the helicopter you're in crashes, you make your way past the wreckage into the first building, and you're hit with a Singularity event. This sends you back into 1955 during an incident involving the building catching fire. During this event, you see a man nearly fall to his death after the floor beneath him collapses. Hanging on for dear life, you lift him up and carry him to safety before the Singularity hits again, sending you back to present day. Except now everything's different. The man you saved was Dr. Nikolai Demichev, and he is now the statue in the lobby instead of Stalin. Quickly you learn that you fucked up. Due to the research done by Dr. Demichev, the Soviet Union was able to seize control of the world within only 6 months, as the weapons he was able to design using E99 were far more powerful than anything the rest of the world had.
And to think, only 4 weeks ago Dr. Demichev almost died in that fire. Whoever saved him did us all a huge favor.
After learning this, we head out through the doors and enter one of my favorite sections of the game. You enter a destroyed housing area, where the workers and their families would live. This whole area is just brimming with atmosphere. You hear the voice of a child who used to live here, you see dried blood along the floors and walls, you hear growls and see things out of the corner of your eyes. You read notes talking about a sickness going around and how it's changing people. And then you have your first encounter. Now this is a good jump scare. There's proper build up here so it feels earned. Not every jump scare in this game is executed as well as this, but they're not egregious with it either. In fact, the game seems to be a little indecisive. It's not sure if it wants to be a horror game or not, so it jumps back and forth between fast-paced action and slow-paced exploring. That means you'll have amazing horror sections like this early on, and then go an hour or two without a single scare before finding another creepy area with enemies lurking around. I guess this is kind of similar to Fear, which also had that back and forth between action and horror, but that was slightly better paced. Continuing on with only a disappointingly weak revolver, I mean seriously, look at this thing. It looks like it should be a devastating magnum, but it's really weak. You can kill enemies in one hit to the head, but they can survive 5 or 6 shots to the body, and with the way they shamble around flinging their head back and forth, it's pretty difficult to hit. You go into the school, which of course is just as creepy. Also, can I just say, it's pretty rare to see dead children in a game. Here you find a bunch of notes and audio logs talking about E99 and the dangers it presents, and even worse, that it was being purposely fed to children by infusing it with their milk. Contact with E99 was making people sick and slowly mutating them, and that must explain why this kid sounds like Dexter from Dexter's Lab.
I don't understand why I can't be with my friends during lunch. They make us all sit at assigned
People who were found to be succumbing to the sickness were killed as there was no cure available, and people who heard about this would hide their sickness until it was too late and they were fully mutated. You eventually run back into Captain Devlin, who was in the helicopter with you when it went down. From here you'll just be fighting more of these mutants, some of whom must have been break dancers in their past life, while working your way to a radio tower in order to contact the military. Through these sections you'll come across both the assault rifle and shotgun, both of which are really good workhorse weapons. The assault rifle will basically always be in your loadout because it's so versatile, and the shotgun is really fun to use as it has a lot of impact and can absolutely decimate an enemy within close range. Although I will say, I don't know if I'm a fan of the reload animation or not. It's certainly unique, but it kinda just looks awkward. Once you make it to the radio tower, Devlin attempts to use the radio, but the answer comes from the big man himself, Dr. Demichev. The building will then be swarmed by Soviet soldiers. This whole section is a lot of fun. The sniper rifle is the real star here with its ability to slow down time while aiming down the scope. It's honestly one of my favorite sniper rifles in video games period. It's just so satisfying to use. The way heads and limbs pop off when hit makes this weapon feel truly overpowered, even though it really isn't. It does kill enemy soldiers in one shot, but so much of this game is close to mid-range, so it really isn't a very effective weapon to carry at all times. However, when the situation calls for it, this thing cleans house. Eventually, you're overwhelmed by the amount of enemies, and when you try to retreat, you're captured. For the first time in over 50 years, you get to see Dr. Demichev face to face. He knows who you are and remarks how you haven't aged a day. He believes you to be carrying something called the TMD, which is a time manipulation device. He shoots Devlin in the face, and as he starts to threaten you with the same fate, bullets start flying. You use this as a distraction and run while someone is radioing you directions on where to go. After escaping custody, you meet Catherine, a member of a group called Mir 12. This group claims to know what actually happened, and their whole plan relies on helping you out so you can go back and correct the timeline. Of course, this won't actually be possible without the TMD, which is theorized to be in a hidden vault somewhere in Dr. Beresov's research lab. Once you find it, you can start interacting with items infused with E99 to age or de-age it, as well as age soldiers to dust. It's a pretty handy tool, though it's mostly used for solving physics-based puzzles, similar to the gravity gun from Half-Life 2, even being able to lift items and throw them with a ton of force. As you progress through the game, you'll find upgrades to the TMD which will give it new functions like being able to turn human enemies into mutants. After finding the TMD, you travel back to 1955 using a time rift in the lab. This will take you back to the day that Demichev raided Beresov's office looking for the TMD. In this current timeline, Demichev kills Beresov out of frustration since he refuses to tell him where it is. You need to stop this from happening, as we'll need Dr. Beresov's help in figuring out how to correct the timeline. This whole section is a cool idea, as you find yourself fighting enemy soldiers from the 50s carrying guns of that time. You can't actually pick up any of these weapons, which is a tad disappointing, and they just drop ammo for current modern day weapons, which is a little weird, but whatever. It'd be cool if they had era-accurate weapons to use, but regardless, it's an interesting set piece. This section also sees you using the first heavy weapon, the Seeker Rifle, which you get after saving Dr. Beresov. The heavy weapons work a bit differently, as they don't actually take up a weapon slot. Instead, you simply drop the gun when you switch weapons and the ammo is very limited, which makes sense given how powerful these weapons can be. The Seeker Rifle is a lot of fun to use, as holding down the aim while you shoot allows you to control the bullet while in slow motion. It makes the gun absolutely broken since you're virtually untouchable while using it, and on top of this, the shots are explosive, so a single bullet will kill human enemies and most mutants. After saving Beresov and taking another rift back to the present, he tells you to meet him at a tower nearby where he'll explain everything. After meeting up with him, he explains how Demichev rose to power and what happened to Katorga 12. There's this massive tower called the Singularity which holds an incredible amount of E99 energy. It's not exactly explained what this tower was built for or what it actually does, but it's the reason we're in this whole situation to begin with. It's the thing that caused the radiation spikes that were originally detected. Apparently there was an accident a few months after the Singularity was built and it exploded, killing thousands and turning those who remained into mutants. The very few survivors were either evacuated or left behind to die. This is why Katorga 12 is the way it is now. It's overrun by mutants and many buildings have crumbled to rubble. The Singularity also periodically sends out these blasts that send you back and forth between the 50s and 2010. This is what happened earlier in the game when you were sent back to the burning building and saved Demichev. Beresov believes that destroying the Singularity is the only way to correct the timeline, however it's not that simple. There's only one explosive on the island that's powerful enough to actually accomplish this goal, the E-99 bomb, and that's at the bottom of the harbor due to the boat carrying this bomb sinking after the initial Singularity explosion. That becomes your goal for basically the remainder of the game: retrieve the bomb and destroy the Singularity. Something weird happened here though. I ran into a glitch that seems fairly rare, as when I looked it up, I could only find one thread on Steam about it. After Beresov shows you the projector video telling you how Dr. Demichev rose to power, it's supposed to cut back to your view and Beresov will keep talking to you and Catherine. However, his voice faded out for me and he was just nowhere to be seen.
So you see, the timeline has been opened.
If you destroy the Singularity in the past, history will correct itself.
Someone said it sounds like he's falling under the map, which is why you can hear his voice fade like he's getting further away. There's no way to fix this, as at checkpoints with him falling, even after quitting and relaunching the game, the same thing happened. Luckily it's not game breaking, you can just continue on. However, you missed the whole conversation about the E-99 bomb, so it's not clear what you're supposed to be doing. I've already played through the game on Xbox 360 before, so it was just kind of funny, but with how well this game immerses you, that certainly takes you out of the moment. Throughout playing the game, you'll notice plenty of secrets and tucked away items like E-99 tech and weapon tech. This makes up for one of my favorite aspects of the game. The game is constantly rewarding the player for exploration. While the game is very linear, there are short offshoot paths that often contain these items, and sometimes even audio tapes and visions of the past, which help develop the story further. If you're someone like me who finds themselves checking every nook and cranny, you'll find that you can become really powerful with the amount of upgrades you can obtain. There are these weapon lockers you can find throughout the game, often before big conflicts, and these automatically fill with every weapon you pick up. So if you've already picked up a weapon before, you can just grab it from the locker whenever you come across one. This is a fun mechanic that still allows the 2 weapon limit system, but stops you from having to search for specific weapons you like. You can also purchase ammo at these lockers for E-99 tech and upgrade your weapons using weapon tech. Each gun has 3 upgrades, but they're all the same. You can upgrade mag size, reload speed, and damage output, and each can be upgraded twice. The first upgrade costing 1 weapon tech and the second costing 2. Depending on how vigilant you are, you will come across these weapon tech fairly often, but it's still nowhere near enough to upgrade every weapon, so you have to choose carefully. There's no way to reverse a choice, so once you've upgraded, you've committed. This is the same case for TMD upgrades and hero perks, which can be purchased using E99. These can be done at augmenters, which in a lot of cases will be right next to a weapons locker. This allows you to upgrade your health and energy pools, medkit effectiveness, as well as add certain perks like one that allows you to get health back after each kill, or the best one in my opinion, Scientist, which gives you double E99 tech on every pickup. This combined with being thorough can make you incredibly overpowered. In fact, for that reason I think the game is best played on hard. This game is just far too easy on normal difficulty. I made that mistake this time and I regretted it. It just becomes kind of mindless since very few things present a threat once you've upgraded. Hell, I didn't even die a single time throughout my entire playthrough, which is quite different from hard difficulty, which I played earlier this year for the achievement on Xbox. It still wasn't that hard, but at least it offered some challenge, even if most of the time that came from phase ticks, or as I like to call them, little pieces of shit. The room that you first encounter them in literally destroyed me for like 20 to 30 minutes on hard, which probably contributed to like 80% of my deaths on that playthrough. Phase ticks are this game's version of a small enemy who rushes towards you and explodes. They aren't that bad in open areas, but these things love nesting in tight little sewers. On normal, they're not quite the menace they were on hard. I managed the area first try instead of over a dozen attempts. While we're on the topic, the enemy design in this game is quite good. There's not a lot of variety in the mutants, but the few we got all serve their own purpose, so it makes the playthrough feel varied. Plus, the way they design these encounters throughout the game is interesting. They introduce you to new enemy types slowly by dedicating entire sections to that specific enemy. It allows you to figure out how to deal with them without being overwhelmed, before finally mixing the enemy types towards the end where you'll see mutants and soldiers fighting each other. For the very early sections of the game, you'll only be fighting shambling mutants, which are a bit spongier than the human soldiers you'll meet next, but not very deadly. They can lunge at you to knock you down, but a well-placed shot to the head will put them down quick. Next you'll fight soldiers, which are, well, human soldiers. You should know how these work by now, they're in damn near every game. They shoot at you and can be killed very quickly, but usually come in large groups. There are also elite soldiers which carry more powerful weapons like miniguns and rocket launchers. They can also tank more damage, and the armor they wear blocks them from being able to be aged to dust or turned into a revert. Speaking of which, reverts are similar looking to the basic mutants, but are slightly shorter and completely blind. They only attack you if they can hear you moving or shooting, so moving past them slowly is an option. Turning an enemy into a revert is a dangerous choice. It'll still attack you if it detects you. That means that your only real option to do this is to turn one soldier into a revert and then hide behind cover while the other enemy shoot at you, drawing its attention. Surprisingly, the reverts are fairly easy to kill, but they can deal a lot of damage with their puking ability. Ultimately, it's not very beneficial to turn a soldier into a revert, but it does look cool. You also have Zeks, which are a pretty unique enemy. They can phase in and out of our timeline. In order to attack and receive damage from these enemies, they have to be in our time. So they'll often phase out while moving towards you, and then right as they're about to attack, phase back in. You can use your impulse, which is just the melee attack with the TMD, to force them back into our timeline. They also have a very interesting alternate attack, where they'll pull an explosive barrel from another timeline and chuck it at you. It's actually really fun when they do that, because you can just shoot it while it's in their hands, or catch it and throw it back to take down a huge group of them. The final main mutants are called Radions or Radions, which are these massive weird looking bug things. They shoot explosives from their mouth and they can take a lot of damage to kill, but you only see these things through one section of the game. They also just kinda don't fit in here. They're way too big, and the couple of times that you take them on by themselves, the area is too small for it to move, meaning it just sort of sits there having no way to dodge your attacks. There are a couple of other unique mutants which you only see once or twice, and even a couple of bosses, both of which are too short and easy. It's kind of weird that there's only 2 bosses in the game and neither of them are at the end. In fact, the second boss is like halfway through the game and you just don't get another. The first boss fight is against a King Zek, who's just a more powerful version of a regular Zek. This fight just boils down to waiting for him to throw a barrel so you can catch it and throw it back and then shoot him in his weak point, which changes positions as the fight continues. The second boss fight is a giant phase tick. It's a pretty cool boss fight as a spectacle, taking place while you're crossing a railroad bridge. The fight is really simple in this one, you just shoot his weak points until they explode, and once all of his weak points are destroyed, the fight is basically over. In fact, both boss fights are over in just a couple minutes, so they really don't feel like major threats. I wish they would have done more with these, or at least buffed their health a little bit. We have ourselves a few more weapons to talk about that we found after meeting Borisov. First, the spike shot, which works like a mix of a railgun and an explosive crossbow. You have to charge before firing for a more accurate shot, and then the projectile will stick into an enemy for a couple seconds before detonating. It's one of my least favorite guns in the game, mostly because it's inaccurate. Even fully charged, shots seem to miss for no reason. Also, they give you this weapon to use while on a moving platform, which is probably the worst location to show off a projectile weapon like this. You will miss most of your shots using this thing during this section. I recommend picking it up just to have it, but immediately switching back to the sniper rifle. The other weapon we get is a minigun, which is both amazing and a bad decision. It's very powerful and has a large magazine that can be reloaded much faster than typical miniguns. This sounds great, and it is, but it completely defeats the purpose of the assault rifle. Now this isn't exactly new, quite a few games eventually replace the assault rifle with a minigun or something similar, and it works well in those games. My problem with it in this game is that it means any upgrades you put into the assault rifle are essentially wasted, since it's all around a worse weapon than the minigun. There's no reason to ever go back to it. Even fully upgraded, it's less powerful than the base minigun. I really like the design and how powerful the minigun feels, but I think it would have better served a purpose as a heavy weapon in the same category as the seeker rifle I mentioned earlier, where once you run out of ammo you just drop the weapon and it doesn't actually take a slot and you can't pull it from the locker. I think this would have been a better balance while keeping the assault rifle useful. There's also the final standard weapon, a grenade launcher. The basic shot is kinda awkward since the grenades don't go nearly as far as you'd expect, however the secondary shot is really interesting and makes this weapon worthwhile. While holding down the aim button and shooting a grenade, it locks you in place, and instead of controlling yourself, you can control the movement of the grenade. This means you can duck behind cover and shoot out a grenade, roll it over to an enemy and detonate it at their feet, all without leaving that cover. It's a fun game-changing mechanic that serves an entirely unique purpose. Finally, the last weapon we get, and the only other heavy weapon in the game, the rocket launcher. This thing shoots rockets which can track enemies, and honestly, it's a little underwhelming. It basically serves the same purpose as the grenade launcher, albeit with more range, but it's not nearly as interesting and does similar damage. Soldiers will be destroyed in one hit, but weirdly the Radions can tank up to 4 rockets before dying, and you only get 10 before you run out of ammo. It just feels like this weapon doesn't have a unique purpose on the weapon roster. Singularity has a really good aesthetic. I wouldn't call it graphically impressive, even by the standards of the time, as it has some really muddy textures, but I'd still say that it's a good looking game because of the art style they were going for. Yes, a lot of this game features the browns and yellows that ran rampant on the 7th generation, but it also has vibrant oranges and blues that help differentiate it from others of the time. Plus, that general muddy look kind of fits the setting of this game, so it feels cohesive. I also think that this game features some really cool set pieces that are both fun to play through and good visual spectacles, especially sequences like when you de-age the ship in the harbor so you can board it. As you progress through, the ship is rapidly aging because it's too large for the TMD's power to sustain, meaning the ship starts sinking while you're searching for the cargo hold. It becomes a mad dash to find what you're looking for and escape the ship before it sinks. Sequences like this are a good contrast to the underground tunnels and sewers that you progress through most of the game. I will say a lot of sections get blurred in my mind because they're visually samey, but the areas they want to stick out become even more memorable because of it. I guess this is an example of this game's stop and start pacing that's applied basically at the start of the game. You'll start slow as you work your way through the town and school, and then the action picks up for a while when you get back in contact with Devlin, before slowing back down after escaping Demichev. This is pretty much consistent throughout the game until you get near the end, where the action picks up and stays that way until you reach the final moments. Singularity is what I'd call making the best of a bad situation. After Wolfenstein's poor sales, Activision laid off over 30 Raven employees, leaving the team short-handed to finish development on this game. Unfortunately, that can be felt within the game. It starts very strong and continues that way throughout most of it, but you can tell they had to rush the ending to meet the release date, as the endings felt very underbaked. Even worse is that this game also sold poorly, and another 40 employees were let go, with those that remained sentenced to work on Call of Duty. That being said, what we got was still a very fun FPS with good horror elements and an incredibly interesting setting. I hope that one day we get to see Raven return to its former glory.